How close? Mara's voice was tight. Not in this sector yet. But we need to consider moving you and Emma to a more secure location. Luke slid his list across the table. Is there anything specific you need while I'm out? Mara studied the paper, adding a few items in small, neat handwriting. Emma needs warmer clothes. And maybe, she hesitated, something to help her sleep. The nightmares are getting worse. Luke nodded, understanding. Emma had woken twice in the night, crying out for her mother. I'll be back before dark, he promised. The rifle's loaded just in case, but it's only for emergencies. I know how to shoot, Mara said quietly. Robert made sure of that. He liked to take me to the range, show me off to his friends. Called it insurance, in case someone ever broke in. Luke heard the bitter irony in her voice. The gun skills meant to keep her captive might now help keep her free. Bolt the door behind me, he instructed. Don't answer for anyone but me. I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. Emma emerged from the guest room, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Are you leaving, Mr. Luke? He knelt to her level. Just for a few hours. To get food and some surprises for you. A present. Emma's face brightened. Maybe, Luke smiled. If you're good for your mom while I'm gone, I will be, Emma promised solemnly. And I'll watch for bad guys. Luke exchanged a look with Mara over the child's head. Even at 6, Emma understood far too much about danger. The drive into Pine Ridge took 40 minutes along newly plowed roads. The small town looked postcard perfect under its blanket of snow. Storefronts decorated for winter, smoke rising from chimneys. Luke parked outside the general store, his first stop for supplies. The warmth inside fogged his glasses as he entered. Martha, the owner's wife, greeted him from behind the counter. Luke Dawson. Thought that storm might have buried you up in those hills? Takes more than snow to keep me down, Luke replied with a practiced smile. Heard you found some stranded hikers, Martha said. Curiosity evident. Must be cozy up there in that little cabin of yours. Luke kept his expression neutral. Just doing my job. As he gathered supplies, extra food, children's cold medicine, a warm hat and gloves sized for Emma, he noticed the flyer on the community bulletin board. Robert Wells's face smiled confidently beneath the bold headline, Help Find My Family. Luke moved closer, studying the paper. Professional quality, full color. It showed Robert with Mara and Emma, a perfect family portrait. Mara's smile looked genuine in the photo, her arm around her daughter, leaning slightly into her husband. Below the image, text described Mara as emotionally fragile and potentially endangering herself and our daughter. A phone number for tips. A substantial reward offered. And at the bottom, in slightly smaller print, organized search parties depart daily from Wells Realty. 9 a.m. Luke took one of the flyers, folding it carefully into his pocket. At the counter, Martha chatted as she rang up his purchases. Those poor people on the flyer, you've seen it? Such a shame. Robert Wells is beside himself. Organized the whole town into search teams? That's so. Luke kept his tone conversational. Oh, yes. He's been on the local news and everything. Says his wife had some kind of breakdown. Took their little girl and just vanished. Martha lowered her voice. Always seemed like such a nice family, but you never know what goes on behind closed doors. No, Luke agreed quietly. You never do. His next stop was the ranger station to file his official report. He kept the details minimal. A mother and child found disoriented in the woods, recovering from exposure, situation under control. His supervisor, Jim, seemed satisfied with the sparse information. By the way, Jim mentioned as Luke was leaving, had a call asking if our rangers had seen anything of those missing persons. He gestured to the same flyer posted on their bulletin board. Wells is pretty worked up, offering a serious reward. Haven't seen anything, Luke replied. Been pretty isolated with the storm. Outside the station, Luke noticed how many flyers had been posted around town, on telephone poles, shop windows, the community center. Robert's face was everywhere, the concerned husband and father searching desperately for his family. Luke's last stop was the local pharmacy. As he waited for his prescription, he overheard 2 women talking. I heard she'd been acting strange for months, one whispered. Robert told Pastor Dave she'd been having episodes, forgetting things, getting angry for no reason. Such a shame, the other replied. He seems like such a devoted father. Luke collected the children's sleep aid and headed back to his truck, unease settling heavy in his chest. The narrative had been carefully constructed. Robert had laid groundwork for months, establishing Mara as unstable long before she fled. Driving back toward the cabin, Luke made a decision. They couldn't stay there much longer. The search would eventually expand into his section of forest, and when it did, the first place they'd check would be the ranger's cabin. He needed that hunting cabin ready, and soon darkness had fallen by the time Luke returned to the cabin. He found Mara by the window, rifle across her lap, Emma asleep on the couch nearby. Relief washed over Mara's face when she recognized his truck. 3 knocks, pause, 2 more, Luke said softly through the door. The locks slid back immediately. You're late, Mara whispered, helping him with the supplies. I was worried. Town was busy. Everyone talking about the search. Luke set down his bags and removed the folded flyer from his pocket, handing it to Mara. She unfolded it, her face hardening as she stared at the family portrait. He used our Christmas photo. I remember that day. He'd broken 3 of my ribs the night before. Told me if I didn't smile for the photographer, he'd do worse. Luke unpacked quietly, letting her process. We need to move soon. The hunting cabin I mentioned, it's deeper in the forest, off any marked trails. We should leave tomorrow night. Mara nodded, setting the flyer aside. Emma will be disappointed. She likes it here. It's only temporary. Michael's working on getting you both into a secure shelter in Grant County, but it will take time to arrange safely. Emma stirred on the couch, blinking awake. Mr. Luke's back, she murmured sleepily. I brought you something, Luke said, kneeling beside her. He produced a small plush deer and a book about forest animals. Emma's eyes widened as she took the gifts. It's so soft, she whispered, stroking the deer's fur. We need to pack tomorrow, Mara told her gently. We're going on an adventure to a different cabin. Is Mr. Luke coming too? Anxiety edged Emma's voice. Of course, Luke assured her. I wouldn't let you explore the deep forest without a guide. While Mara helped Emma back to bed, Luke reorganized supplies for their journey. He'd need to make multiple trips to stock the hunting cabin properly. It was more primitive than his ranger cabin. No electricity, just a wood stove, propane lamps, and a hand pump for water. Mara returned, moving quietly through the kitchen to help. She went right back to sleep. The deer helped, Luke nodded, grateful for small mercies. As they worked side by side, organizing essentials, Mara's hand brushed against a metal box Luke had pulled from a high shelf. What's this? She asked. Luke hesitated. Old keepsakes. Nothing important. Curiosity flashed in Mara's eyes, one of the first signs of interest in something beyond immediate survival. She opened the box before Luke could object, revealing a few military patches, medals, dog tags, and a framed photograph. You never mentioned you were a soldier, she said, studying the picture of a younger Luke in desert camouflage, arm around another man in the same uniform, Special Forces, medical unit. 2 tours in Afghanistan? Luke's voice was neutral, matter-of-fact. Mara touched one of the medals. Distinguished Service Cross. That's significant, isn't it? Luke took the box gently, replacing the photo. Our convoy hit an IED. I pulled some guys out. Did what anyone would do. Not anyone, Mara said quietly. Is that how you met Michael? Luke nodded. We served together. He was there that day. He closed the box. It was another life. Is that why you became a ranger? After the war. Partly. Luke set the box aside. Cities felt too chaotic after coming back. Too many people, too much noise. The forest made sense. It has dangers, but they're honest ones. Understanding passed between them, the recognition of trauma, differently experienced but familiar nonetheless. How did you lose your wife? Mara asked softly. Cancer. Aggressive. 3 years ago. Luke's hands stilled on the supplies he'd been organizing. We met after I got back. She was a nurse at the VA hospital. Sarah never got to see this cabin. We'd just bought it when she got sick. Plan to retire here someday? I'm sorry, Mara said. Me too. Luke resumed packing. About a lot of things. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the cabin warm against the cold night outside. Eventually, Mara spoke again. I met Robert at the bank where I worked. He came in to discuss a business loan. Asked me out the same day. Her voice was distant, remembering. He was charming, successful. Everyone said I was lucky. The first time he hit me, I was pregnant with Emma. He cried afterward, promised it would never happen again. A bitter smile touched her lips. Classic, right? The story every abused woman tells. It's not your fault, Luke said firmly. I know that, logically. Mara folded a blanket with precise movements. But I stayed 6 years. What does that make me? A survivor, Luke answered without hesitation. You got out. You protected Emma, that's what matters. Mara looked up, meeting his eyes directly. Thank you for not judging. There's only one person in this story who deserves judgment, Luke said, his voice hardening slightly. And it isn't you. Outside, an owl called into the night. The forest sounds had become familiar to Mara and Emma now, no longer threatening, but a reminder of the distance between them and Robert. Tomorrow that distance would increase further. We should get some sleep, Luke suggested. Tomorrow will be a long day. Mara nodded, but made no move to leave. Instead, she impulsively reached for Luke's hand, squeezing it once. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found us. Luke's fingers curled around hers briefly. But I did. That's what matters now. 2 weeks at the hunting cabin had established new rhythms. The small, rustic structure nestled against a rocky outcropping, nearly invisible from any trail. A stream gurgled nearby, partially frozen but still flowing beneath the ice. Inside, the single room felt surprisingly cozy. The wood stove radiated steady heat. Propane lamps cast warm light in the evenings, and the simple furnishings had been arranged to create separate sleeping areas with makeshift curtains. Luke moved between the hunting cabin and his ranger post, maintaining appearances while watching for any signs of search parties encroaching on their territory. So far, the hunt had remained concentrated near the town and main roads, exactly where Luke had suggested to his supervisor they focus efforts when asked about the missing mother and child. This morning, Luke was teaching Emma to identify animal tracks in the fresh snow near the cabin. See how the rabbit hops? 4 prints together. The 2 small ones in front are the front paws, and the 2 longer ones behind are the back legs pushing off. Luke pointed to the delicate impressions. Emma knelt to study them, her face serious beneath a wool hat Luke had brought her. Can we follow them? Maybe we'll find baby rabbits. Not in winter, Luke explained. They'll have babies in the spring. Right now, this one is just looking for food, like us, Emma said. But we don't have to hop through the snow, Luke smiled, glancing up to see Mara watching them from the cabin doorway. She'd wrapped a blanket around her shoulders against the cold, but her face had lost the haunted look she'd worn when he first found them. Out here, miles from roads or other people, she moved more freely, as if the weight on her shoulders had lightened. Don't go far, she called. I've got soup warming. Back inside, they settled around the small table. Emma chattered about the tracks they'd found, her knowledge of the forest growing daily. Luke nodded, answering her questions patiently, while Mara served the simple meal. I picked up the radio earlier, Luke said as they ate. Michael has news. The state investigation into Robert's business dealings is gaining traction. They found some financial irregularities that might give us leverage. Mara nodded, absently twisting the gold band on her left hand, a habit Luke had noticed often. She caught him watching and stilled her fingers. I should have taken it off long ago, she said quietly. It was complicated. No need to explain, Luke assured her. Emma had finished eating and moved to the corner where she'd arranged her few possessions, the plush deer, the forest book, colored pencils, and paper Luke brought on his supply runs. With the child occupied, Mara continued in a lower voice. For years I told myself I stayed for Emma, that she needed a father, a stable home. Her fingers resumed turning the ring. But it wasn't just that. There was a part of me that remembered how it felt in the beginning, before everything changed. And I kept thinking if I just tried harder, that version of Robert might come back. Luke listened without judgment, giving her the space to find her own words. I know now he never will. Determination hardened Mara's voice. That man doesn't exist. Maybe he never did. With deliberate movement, she twisted the gold band off her finger. It caught briefly on her knuckle, then came free. She held it in her palm, staring down at the simple circle that had once symbolized love, then permanence, and finally captivity. I don't need this anymore, she said. Luke nodded, understanding the significance of the moment. Mara stood and walked to the wood stove. For a moment he thought she might throw the ring into the flames, but instead she placed it on the mantel shelf. I'll sell it, she said practically. When this is over, Emma might need things I can't afford yet. The practicality of the gesture moved Luke more than a dramatic disposal would have. It showed Mara thinking of the future, believing in one beyond fear and hiding. Michael says there's a women's shelter in Mapleton that specializes in high-risk cases, Luke said. They have security protocols, legal advocates. They can help with restraining orders, divorce filings, custody arrangements. Mapleton's 2 counties away, Mara noted. That's good. It's far enough that Robert's local influence shouldn't reach, but close enough that the state authorities can still be involved in his case. Luke hesitated. Michael thinks we should move you there by the end of the week. They're expecting you. A shadow passed over Mara's face. Not fear this time, but something Luke couldn't quite read. That soon. It's the safest option, Luke said gently. The longer you're here, the greater the chance of being found. Mara glanced toward Emma, who was humming softly as she drew. She started to feel safe here. With you, she'll adjust, Luke assured her, though something tightened in his chest at the thought of them leaving. Kids are resilient. And what about you? Mara asked suddenly, her eyes meeting his. When we go to this shelter, what happens to you? The question caught Luke off guard. I'll be fine. I always am. That's not what I asked. Before he could formulate a response, Emma called from her corner. Look, I've made us building a snowman. She held up her drawing proudly. In the picture, 3 figures stood around a lopsided snowman. Emma had drawn herself between Luke and Mara, all of them smiling beneath a bright yellow sun. No shadows, no fear, just a family enjoying a winter day. It was the first time Luke had seen Mara truly laugh. The sound transformed her face completely, erasing years of tension. In that moment, with the gold ring abandoned on the mantel, Luke could see the woman she might have been, might still become, outside. The radio on Luke's belt crackled with an incoming transmission. Luke snatched the radio from his belt, stepping outside to take the call. Mara moved instinctively to Emma, drawing her daughter close as they waited. Minutes later, the cabin door reopened. It's Michael, Luke said, his expression unreadable. He's coming here, directly. Here? Alarm flashed across Mara's face. How does he even know where we are? I told him. He's the only one who knows. Luke checked his watch. He's about 3 miles out on a snowmobile. Should arrive in 20 minutes. Mara paced the small cabin, anxiety returning to her movements. I thought no one was supposed to come here. That was the point. Michael wouldn't come without good reason, Luke assured her, though concern lined his face as well. He's being careful. Wearing a conservation officer uniform as cover, Luke busied himself securing the cabin's perimeter while they waited, checking sight lines through windows, positioning himself to watch the approach through the trees. Mara had moved Emma to the back of the cabin, away from the windows, distracting her with a card game. The distant whine of a snowmobile engine cut through the forest quiet. Luke's hand moved instinctively to the rifle propped by the door. It's him, he confirmed, relaxing slightly as a figure in dark green uniform came into view. Michael Anderson was shorter than Luke, but similarly built, solid, capable. His dark hair was flecked with early gray at the temples, his expression serious as he killed the engine and approached the cabin. Luke met him outside, the men exchanging a brief formal embrace before speaking in low voices. When they entered, Michael removed his hat, nodding respectfully to Mara. Ma'am, I'm Detective Anderson, State Police. Luke's told me about your situation. You're taking a risk coming here, Mara said, her arm still protectively around Emma. Calculated one. Michael's voice was steady, reassuring. On paper, I'm inspecting wildlife corridors in this sector. Official business. Emma studied the newcomer with solemn eyes. Are you Mr. Luke's friend? A smile briefly softened Michael's professional demeanor. Since we were younger than you. He saved my life once. Like he saved us, Emma said with certainty. Smart kid, Michael observed, then turned to business. I've got updates. Some good, some concerning. Luke gestured to the table. As they sat, Mara sent Emma back to her drawing corner with quiet instructions to stay there. First, the good news, Michael began. We found evidence of financial irregularities in Wells' real estate business. Looks like he's been laundering money for some unsavory clients. State Financial Crimes Unit is building a case. How long? Luke asked. Weeks at least. Maybe months for the full investigation. But, Michael leaned forward, we might have enough for an initial warrant soon. That could give us leverage. Mara's hands twisted in her lap. Robert has friends in law enforcement. Local level, yes, Michael acknowledged. That's why we're keeping this at the state. My captain is handling it personally. No information flows back to the county. And the concerning news? Luke prompted. Michael's expression darkened. Wells has hired private investigators. 2 of them. Ex-cops from Riverside County. They've been interviewing people in town, showing photos. One of them was asking questions at the ranger station yesterday. Luke exchanged a glance with Mara. How close are they? Too close for comfort. Someone remembered giving directions to a lost hiker, matching Mara's description the day you found them. The PIs have been scouting forest access points, focusing on the northern sector. Where we are now, Luke concluded grimly, which is why we need to move up the timeline. The shelter in Mapleton is ready now. We can transport Mara and Emma tomorrow night. Mara's face paled. Tomorrow? But we're not prepared. I'll handle transportation, Michael continued. Unmarked vehicle, back roads. We'll use a conservation officer vehicle as cover, just like today. The adults continued discussing logistics, while Emma sat in her corner, seemingly absorbed in her drawing but missing nothing. Luke noticed her shoulders hunched slightly, her strokes with the colored pencil becoming harder, more agitated. Emma, he called softly. Come here a minute. The little girl approached hesitantly, glancing at the stranger in the forest uniform. This is my friend Michael, Luke explained. The one I told you about from the army. Emma studied Michael with the direct gaze of a child. Are you going to take us away from Mr. Luke? Michael looked momentarily taken aback by the directness of the question. We're going to take you and your mom someplace safe, he answered carefully. We're already safe, Emma insisted, looking to Luke for confirmation. Right? Luke felt the weight of her trust, like a physical pressure. Michael's trying to help Emma. Sometimes being truly safe means having lots of people looking out for you, not just one. Emma's lip trembled. But I don't want to go. Mara reached for her daughter, drawing her close. It's going to be okay, baby. Remember how scared we were in the forest before we met Luke. But that turned out all right. This will too. Will we ever see Mr. Luke again? Emma's voice was small. The question hung in the cabin air. Luke exchanged a glance with Mara, seeing his own reluctance mirrored in her eyes. That's up to your mum, Luke said finally. But I'd like that very much. Michael cleared his throat. We should finalize the details. I need to head back before dark. As they returned to planning, Luke noticed Mara's hand had strayed to the empty spot on her finger where her wedding ring had been. But instead of seeming lost without it, she looked more determined, her shoulders straightening as she faced the next challenge. Outside, the afternoon light was already fading from the winter sky. Their time in the forest sanctuary was coming to an end. One way or another, after Michael's departure, the cabin felt different. The outside world had intruded on their sanctuary, bringing with it a timeline and urgency that changed everything. Dinner was a quiet affair, Emma subdued, Mara lost in thought, Luke focused on practical preparations. I'll pack food and emergency supplies tonight, Luke said as he cleared their plates. Michael will be here at dusk tomorrow. Less chance of being spotted in the twilight. Mara nodded, helping Emma get ready for bed. The little girl's bedtime routine had become familiar, teeth brushing with water from the pump, changing into the warmest pajamas, and Luke reading a chapter from the forest book before sleep. Tonight, though, Emma clung a little tighter, asked for a second chapter, then a third. "Just one more, Mr. Luke, please?" Her eyes were wide, fighting sleep. "It's late, Emma," Mara said gently. "We need to rest for our journey tomorrow." "I don't want to go on a journey," Emma whispered, her lower lip trembling. "I want to stay in the forest with the deer and the foxes and Mr. Luke." Luke met Mara's eyes over Emma's head. He saw her struggling with her own conflicted feelings about their departure. "How about this?" Luke suggested. "I'll tell you a special story, not from the book. A true story about a dear family I watched grow up right outside this cabin. And tomorrow, before you leave, we'll put out food for them, so they'll remember you." Emma nodded reluctantly, settling back against her pillow. Luke's deep voice spun a simple tale of forest life, mothers protecting fawns, seasons changing, the cycle of forest life continuing regardless of human concerns. By the time he finished, Emma's eyes had drifted closed, her breathing even and deep. Luke and Mara slipped out to the main room, leaving the curtain partially open to hear Emma if she woke. Outside, a full moon illuminated the snow-covered clearing, turning the world silver blue. Inside, the propane lamp cast warm, golden light that held back the winter night. "She'll miss you," Mara said quietly, stoking the wood stove. "We both will." Luke nodded, unsure how to respond to the emotions stirring beneath her simple statement. "The shelter will have counselors, other kids. She'll adjust. She trusts you," Mara continued. "That's significant. She hasn't trusted any man since she understood what Robert was doing to me." Luke busied himself organizing supplies, uncomfortable with the praise. "Kids are good judges of character. So am I," Mara said. "Now, at least. I wasn't always." They worked together in companionable silence, preparing for tomorrow's departure. When the practical tasks were complete, an awkwardness settled between them. Too much to say, too little time, neither knowing how to begin. "I have something for you," Luke said suddenly, reaching into his pack. He withdrew a small leather-bound journal, its pages worn at the edges, the cover softened with handling. "What is this?" Mara asked as he placed it in her hands. "Sarah's journal," Luke said quietly. "My wife's. She kept it during her illness. Said writing helped her make sense of what was happening." Mara looked up in surprise. "Luke, I can't take this. It's too personal." "I'm not giving it away," he clarified. "Just lending it. I thought it might help." Sarah wrote a lot about finding strength she didn't know she had, about rebuilding a life when the future you expected disappears. Mara ran her fingers over the cover gently, understanding the magnitude of what Luke was sharing. "Thank you. I'll take good care of it. There's something else." Luke reached into his pocket and withdrew a small flip phone. "Prepaid, untraceable. Only Michael and I have the number." "It's already programmed. For emergencies?" Mara asked, taking the phone. "And after, when it's safe." Luke's voice held a question he couldn't quite voice directly. Mara placed the journal and phone carefully in her bag, then turned back to Luke. In the lamplight, her face showed a newfound determination, but also vulnerability. "What makes a home, Luke?" "I've been thinking about that. For years, I thought it was a house, a marriage, the things everyone expects you to want." She glanced toward the curtained alcove where Emma slept. "Then I thought it was just anywhere Emma was safe, isn't it?" Luke asked. "Safety is part of it. But it's more." Her eyes met his directly. "A home is where you're seen, truly seen for who you are, not who someone wants you to be." The implication hung in the air between them. Luke took a half-step closer, drawn by something neither had acknowledged until now. "Mara," he began, "I know this is complicated." She interrupted. I can't." She sighed in frustration at the inadequacy of words. "I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that what you've given us here isn't just shelter." Luke reached for her hand tentatively. When she didn't pull away, he closed his fingers around hers. "I haven't felt this alive since Sarah died. I thought that part of me was gone." The honesty of his admission surprised them both. Mara's eyes widened, then softened. She moved closer, her free hand lightly touching his cheek. "Is this crazy?" she whispered. "After everything?" "Probably," Luke admitted. "But I'm not sorry." The first kiss was hesitant, gentle, both of them unsure. The second was not. Years of loneliness and pain seemed to dissolve as they found in each other something neither had expected to discover in the midst of crisis. When they finally pulled apart, Mara rested her forehead against his chest. "I don't know what happens next," she confessed. "I can't think beyond tomorrow, beyond keeping Emma safe." "We don't have to know yet," Luke said, his arms still around her. One step at a time. Outside, the moon continued its arc across the sky, measuring the hours until dawn. Dawn broke cold and clear. Luke was already outside, checking the trail cameras he'd positioned around the perimeter weeks ago as an early warning system. It had become part of his morning routine, a precaution that had, until now, revealed nothing more threatening than deer, foxes, and the occasional bear. Today was different. Luke stared at the small digital screen, ice forming in his veins. The timestamp showed 3:17 a.m., 3 men moving along the ridge trail a quarter-mile from the cabin. The image was grainy but unmistakable in the camera's infrared mode. Leading the group was a face Luke recognized from flyers and news broadcasts: Robert Wells. Luke quickly checked the other cameras. The men had approached from the south, following what appeared to be snowmobile tracks, Michael's tracks from yesterday. They'd made camp at the ridge overlook, presumably waiting for daylight to continue. Moving silently back to the cabin, Luke found Mara already awake. "Packing the last of their belongings. We need to leave, now." His voice was calm but urgent. "Robert's found us. He's less than a mile away with 2 men. The color drained from Mara's face. "How? My guess? They followed Michael's trail. Professional trackers would spot the snowmobile tracks, even partially covered by fresh snow." "I miss it too," Luke admitted. He'd been dividing his time between his ranger duties and visiting the safe house, unwilling to completely separate from Mara and Emma despite the complications. A knock at the front door brought them both to attention, old fears not entirely banished. Luke moved protectively toward the entrance, relaxing only when he saw Michael through the peephole. "Got those files you requested," Michael said after Luke admitted him. He handed over a thick envelope, then greeted Mara warmly. "How are you holding up?" "One day at a time," she answered honestly. "What's the latest?" Michael settled at the table while Luke prepared coffee. "The prosecutor's building a solid case. Between the evidence from Robert's phone, witness statements, and financial records we've seized, it's looking good. But—" He hesitated. "But?" Mara prompted. "His legal team is top tier. They're already working the media angle, trying to paint him as the victim of a vindictive wife." Michael's expression was apologetic. "They're claiming you manufactured the abuse allegations to cover your affair with Luke." Luke set coffee mugs down with more force than intended. "That's ridiculous. It's also predictable," Mara said quietly. "Classic abuser tactic. Blame the victim, confuse the narrative." She met Michael's gaze steadily. "What does the prosecutor need from me?" "Full statement. Every incident you can recall, with as much detail as possible. Medical records if they exist. Names of anyone who might have witnessed anything, even indirectly." Michael sipped his coffee. "It won't be easy. They'll make you relive everything. I've been living with it for years," Mara replied. "At least now it serves a purpose." The psychologist emerged from the living room, Emma trailing behind. The little girl brightened at the sight of Luke, rushing to hug him. He lifted her easily, something in his chest easing at her simple affection. "Mr. Luke." "Dr. Bennett let me draw the forest again." "Want to see?" "Absolutely," he agreed, setting her down to follow her excited tug toward the living room. Dr. Bennett remained behind, addressing Mara and Michael in professional tones. "Emma's making excellent progress. Her drawings show decreased anxiety, though she still depicts her father as a threatening figure. Will she have to testify?" Mara asked, the question that constantly worried her. "I'm recommending against it," Dr. Bennett said firmly. Her recorded sessions with me should provide sufficient evidence of the psychological impact without subjecting her to a courtroom. Relief washed over Mara's face. From the living room came Emma's animated voice, explaining her artwork to Luke, punctuated by his thoughtful responses. "There's one other matter," Michael said, lowering his voice. "Robert's trying to get visitation rights from jail. His lawyers filed a motion yesterday. The color drained from Mara's face. He can't possibly—" "The prosecutor is fighting it," Michael assured her. "But you should be prepared for every tactic. This is just the beginning. When is the preliminary hearing?" Luke asked, returning with Emma's drawing, a colorful depiction of their cabin in the woods. 2 weeks. State court in Mapleton, not local jurisdiction, Michael confirmed. The financial crimes alone would put him away for years, but the prosecutor wants the domestic violence and child endangerment charges to stick too. Emma tugged at Luke's hand. "Can we go outside? I want to build a real snowman." The adults exchanged glances. "The yard is secure," Michael said. "Perimeter alarms and cameras. She should be able to play normally." "Let me get your coat," Mara told Emma, who bounced excitedly. Watching them prepare for such an ordinary activity, building a snowman, Luke felt an ache of tenderness. In the midst of legal battles and security concerns, the simple joy of a child playing in snow remained untarnished. As Emma ran ahead into the yard, Mara paused in the doorway. "Join us?" Luke nodded, recognizing the invitation for what it was. Not just to build a snowman, but to be part of whatever future they might create after the storm passed. One small, normal moment at a time, the Mapleton County Courthouse stood imposing against the winter sky, its stone facade speaking of permanence and authority. Inside, the polished wood and hushed atmosphere of Courtroom 3 contrasted sharply with the raw wilderness where their ordeal had begun. Mara sat rigidly beside Andrea Donovan, the lead prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman whose reputation for winning domestic violence cases had made her something of a legend in legal circles. Across the aisle, Robert's defense team occupied 3 tables, a small army of expensive suits and leather portfolios. Robert himself sat between his attorneys, his broken leg elevated on a chair, his appearance carefully cultivated, a subtle neck brace added for sympathy. His normally commanding presence softened to appear vulnerable. He'd even grown a slight beard, roughening his usually polished appearance. To anyone who didn't know him, he looked like a wronged husband. Bewildered by the charges against him, Luke sat in the first row of the gallery, directly behind Mara, close enough that she could feel his steady presence. Emma remained at the safe house with Dr. Bennett and a protection detail, one small mercy in this difficult day. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Eleanor Simmons entered, a stern-faced woman in her 60s with keen eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The preliminary proceedings moved quickly. Charges read, pleas entered, motions argued. Robert had pleaded not guilty to all counts: domestic violence, child endangerment, financial fraud, witness intimidation, and a host of lesser charges. "The state calls Mara Wells to the stand," Donovan announced when testimony began. Mara stood, her legs unsteady beneath her simple navy dress. As she passed, Luke reached out, his fingers briefly brushing hers, a silent message of support. She took the witness stand, was sworn in, and faced the crowded courtroom. A court artist sketched rapidly on a pad, capturing the moment. Mara noted the irony. No cameras allowed, yet this stranger would preserve her testimony in careful strokes of charcoal and colored pencil. Her private pain rendered as public record. "Mrs. Wells," Donovan began gently, "how long were you married to the defendant?" 6 years, Mara answered, her voice stronger than she expected. "And during that time, did the defendant ever physically harm you?" "Yes." The single word hung in the courtroom air. "Can you describe the first incident you recall?" Mara took a deep breath. "I was 4 months pregnant with Emma. Robert had been working late. When he came home, I'd fallen asleep on the couch. He was angry that dinner wasn't ready. He grabbed my arm, pulled me up so hard it left finger-shaped bruises, then pushed me against the wall. What happened after that? He apologized the next day. Brought flowers. Said it would never happen again, that he'd been under stress. Mara's voice took on a distant quality. I believed him. And did similar incidents continue? Yes, usually followed by apologies, gifts. Then it would happen again. Gradually more frequent, more severe. Robert's attorney stood. Objection, Your Honor. The witness is making generalizations without specific incidents. I have specific incidents, Mara said before the judge could rule. A flash of anger breaking through her composed facade. Would you like me to describe each bruise, each time I had to cover marks with makeup, each excuse I made to friends? The judge's gavel cracked once. Overruled. The witness will continue, with specific examples as requested. For the next hour, Mara detailed a pattern of escalating abuse, physical, emotional, financial. The isolation from friends and family. The control over her movements, her phone, their finances. The threats if she tried to leave. Throughout her testimony, she avoided looking at Robert, focusing instead on Donovan's compassionate face or the familiar presence of Luke in the gallery when she described the final incident, Robert breaking her wrist over Emma's dress purchase. Several jurors visibly flinched. And what happened after this incident? Donovan asked. I waited until Robert left for a business dinner. Then Emma and I packed what we could carry and left. We were trying to reach a women's shelter in Grant County, but we got lost in the forest. Mara's voice softened. That's where Ranger Dawson found us. Objection. Robert's lead attorney stood. The witness is introducing hearsay about events after leaving the home, which are not relevant to the alleged abuse, Your Honor, Donovan countered. The witness's flight and subsequent rescue are directly relevant to establishing the severity of the situation that prompted such desperate action. Overruled, Judge Simmons decided. Continue, Mrs. Wells. When Mara finished her direct testimony, Robert's attorney approached for cross-examination. His smile never reached his eyes. Mrs. Wells, you've painted quite a picture for the court today. His voice dripped with skepticism. Yet in 6 years, you never filed a police report, never visited an emergency room, never told family or friends about this alleged abuse. Why is that? Mara met his gaze steadily. Robert is on the city council. He plays golf with the sheriff. His family founded this county. Who exactly should I have told? The attorney's smile tightened. Isn't it true that you were having an affair with Ranger Dawson and invented these allegations to cover your infidelity? Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Donovan was on her feet instantly. Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness with unfounded accusations. Sustained, Judge Simmons snapped. Counsel will refrain from making accusations disguised as questions. But the damage was done. Robert's attorney had planted the seed of doubt he wanted, judging by the speculative glances now directed at Luke in the gallery. No further questions, the attorney said smugly. Returning to his seat, Judge Simmons called a recess until afternoon. As Mara left the stand, her legs finally giving out once she reached the prosecutor's table, she caught Robert watching her with cold calculation. The message in his eyes was clear. This is only the beginning. The trial stretched over 8 grueling days. Each morning, the courtroom filled with spectators, local residents drawn by the scandalous downfall of a prominent citizen. Reporters from regional papers, advocates from domestic violence organizations showing silent support. Mara faced it all with a quiet dignity that impressed even Judge Simmons, whose impartial facade occasionally softened when particularly difficult testimony emerged. Luke testified on the 5th day, describing in precise, measured terms how he'd found Mara and Emma in the forest, their physical condition, the evidence of injury, and Emma's fearful behavior. His military background and ranger credentials lent weight to his observations. Despite aggressive cross-examination attempting to paint him as romantically involved with Mara during her marriage, Luke remained unshaken. Ranger Dawson, Robert's attorney, pressed, Isn't it true that you developed feelings for Mrs. Wells while harboring her from her rightfully concerned husband? I developed concern for a woman with a broken wrist and a terrified child I found nearly frozen in my forest. Luke replied evenly. Any decent human would have done the same. Dan, one of Robert's hired men, proved to be the prosecution's surprise asset. His testimony about Robert's behavior during the forest pursuit, the rage, the weapon, the callous disregard for his wife and child's safety, directly contradicted the caring husband image Robert's team had carefully constructed. By the final day, when closing arguments were scheduled, the atmosphere in courtroom 3 had grown charged with anticipation. The judge's gavel brought immediate silence as proceedings began. Robert sat with artificial composure, his initial confidence visibly eroded by the mounting evidence against him. The financial crimes alone had been thoroughly documented through records found on his phone and subsequent subpoenas. The domestic violence charges had been substantiated not just by Mara's testimony, but by text messages, Emma's sessions with Dr. Bennett, and statements from household staff who'd witnessed concerning behavior. Prosecutor Donovan approached the jury for her closing statement, her manner both authoritative and compassionate. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 8 days, you've heard testimony describing 2 very different Robert Welleses. The defense would have you believe in a successful businessman, devoted husband, and loving father whose mentally unstable wife fled with their child for no valid reason. She paused, letting the characterization sink in. The evidence tells a different story. A man who systematically isolated, intimidated, and abused his wife, who threatened her when she attempted to leave, who pursued her into a wilderness with armed men, endangering not only her, but their 6-year-old daughter. Donovan walked closer to the jury box. You've seen the text messages where he threatened her. You've heard from witnesses who saw his rage firsthand. You've reviewed financial records showing years of fraudulent activities. This isn't a misunderstanding between spouses. This is a pattern of criminal behavior by a man who believed his money and connections placed him above the law. She gestured toward Mara, who sat straight-backed at the prosecution table. Mara Wells didn't run because she was unstable. She ran because she was afraid. Because after years of abuse, she made the courageous decision to protect herself and her daughter. The only instability in that marriage was Robert Welles's violent temper and his belief that his wife and child were possessions he could control through fear. Robert's defense delivered their closing with polished rhetoric, attempting to reframe the evidence as misunderstandings, exaggerations, and vindictive accusations. But their arguments rang hollow against the mountain of evidence, their client's credibility eroded by his own documented words and actions. The jury received their instructions and filed out. Mara sat motionless, Luke directly behind her, close enough that she could feel his steadying presence without turning. "Whatever happens," he murmured, "you've already won. You got out. You protected Emma." Mara nodded slightly, drawing strength from the simple truth of his words. The jury's deliberation, expected to take days, required only 4 hours. When they returned, the forewoman's face revealed nothing as they took their seats. As the jury reached a verdict, Judge Simmons asked, "We have, Your Honor." The courtroom fell silent as verdicts were read count by count. Guilty, guilty, guilty on all charges: domestic violence, child endangerment, financial fraud, witness intimidation. The list continued, each guilty striking another blow to Robert's carefully constructed facade. Robert remained eerily still as the verdicts were announced, only his whitening knuckles betraying his rage. When the final count was read, he turned slowly, his gaze finding Mara with cold hatred that made several jurors shift uncomfortably. Judge Simmons addressed him directly. "Mr. Wells, you have been found guilty on multiple serious charges. This court remands you to custody pending sentencing next week." She turned to the jurors. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, thank you for your service. You are dismissed." The sharp crack of the gavel echoed like a physical release. Mara sagged slightly in her chair, the tension of the past weeks finally breaking. Behind her, Luke's hand found her shoulder. Warm and steady. It's over, he whispered, as Robert was led away in handcuffs. Mara finally looked directly at her husband, the man who had controlled her life for 6 years. His mask of civility had completely fallen, revealing the rage and entitlement beneath. But for the first time, that rage held no power over her. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited with cameras and microphones. Donovan guided Mara through the crowd, deflecting questions with practiced ease. My client asks for privacy as she begins rebuilding her life. Justice has been served today, not just for Mrs. Wells and her daughter, but for all victims who feel trapped by abuse and fear. In the car, waiting to take them back to the safe house, Mara finally allowed the tears to come. Not tears of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming relief. "Emma's safe," she whispered. "He can't hurt us anymore." Luke squeezed her hand gently. "No, he can't." Spring sunlight filtered through newly leafed trees, casting dappled shadows across the garden plot behind Luke's ranger cabin. 1 year had passed since the trial, a year of healing, adjustment, and gradual rebuilding. Mara knelt in the soft earth, guiding Emma's hands as they planted tomato seedlings. At 7, Emma had grown taller, her face fuller, the shadows that once haunted her eyes replaced by the ordinary exuberance of childhood. She wore overalls smudged with dirt, her dark hair pulled into practical braids. "Gentle with the roots," Mara instructed. "They're delicate until they get established." Emma nodded seriously, cupping soil around the fragile plant with careful fingers. "Will they have tomatoes by my birthday?" "If we take good care of them," Mara smiled, tucking a stray hair behind her daughter's ear. "Your dad says these ones grow fast." The term had been Emma's choice, emerging naturally over the past months as Luke's role in their lives deepened. The first time she'd called him Dad had been during a winter hike, the 3 of them following deer tracks in fresh snow. The word had seemed to surprise Emma as much as Luke, but it had felt right to all of them. Luke emerged from the cabin carrying a tray with lemonade and sandwiches. He'd taken a half day from his ranger duties to help with the garden planting, one of many small domestic moments that had gradually woven their lives together. "How's it coming?" he asked, setting the tray on the small table they'd placed under the pines. "Emma's a natural gardener," Mara replied, wiping her hands on her jeans as she stood. "The tomatoes and peppers are in. Just the herbs left." Luke surveyed their work with approval. "My mother would be impressed. She always said you could tell a lot about people by how they tend a garden. What would she say about us?" Mara asked, accepting the glass of lemonade he offered. Luke considered the neat rows, the carefully prepared soil, the simple wooden markers Emma had painted for each plant. "That we're building something meant to last." The understated observation carried weight beyond vegetable plants. Their relationship had developed slowly, deliberately, neither rushing nor holding back, but allowing trust to grow organically from the seeds planted during crisis. Robert's sentencing had brought 20 years in federal prison. The financial crimes alone had warranted 15, with the domestic violence and child endangerment charges adding more. He would be an old man before release, his empire dismantled, his influence shattered. The newspapers had eventually moved on to new scandals, leaving Mara and Emma to rebuild in relative peace. "Can we release the butterflies today?" Emma asked, finishing her sandwich. She'd been raising painted lady butterflies from caterpillars, a science project that had overtaken a corner of the cabin's main room. "After we finish planting," Luke promised. "They need the afternoon warmth for their first flight." Emma hurried back to the garden beds with renewed motivation, watching her. The forest keeps many secrets, but none as desperate as Mara and her young daughter. Fleeing an abusive husband under cover of darkness, they sought refuge among ancient pines where no one could find them. But winter in the mountains shows no mercy, even to those with nowhere else to turn. When Ranger Luke Dawson discovers them huddled beneath a fallen spruce, nearly frozen and starving, he makes a choice that will alter 3 lives forever. At his remote cabin, walls begin to lower as wounds start to heal. The little girl laughs again. Mara's eyes find hope where once was only fear. But what happens when the man they're running from tracks them down? Will Luke's protection be enough against a vengeful husband determined to reclaim what he believes is his? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crunch of frost beneath his boots was the only sound that broke the silence as Luke Dawson made his way along the ridge trail. At 42, the lines around his eyes had deepened, not just from squinting into mountain sunrises, but from the weight of solitude that had become both his comfort and his burden. Dawn painted the pines with gold as Luke paused, adjusting the worn badge on his forest green jacket. 5 years as the senior ranger in this remote outpost had taught him the language of these woods, how to read the whispers of wind through branches, how to interpret tracks left in snow and mud. This morning, something felt different. Luke checked his watch, a sturdy timepiece that had survived his military tours and now kept pace with more peaceful days. There are 6:30 hours, early enough that the world still belonged to creatures rather than people. Just how he preferred it. Morning rounds, he muttered to no one, his breath clouding in the February air. The ritual was simple: Eastern Ridge Trail down to Crescent Lake, then back along Bear Creek. 10 miles of wilderness under his watch. 10 miles where memories of Afghanistan couldn't find him. People in town called him a hermit, though never to his face. They respected him too much for that. Luke the Ranger, the quiet widower who'd returned from war only to lose his wife to cancer 3 years later. They left him to his mountains, and he was grateful. Luke knelt to inspect deer tracks crossing the path, noting the direction of their travel. Healthy population this year, despite the harsh winter. As he stood, something caught his eye, a thin column of smoke rising from the valley below, near the old logging road. Campers weren't uncommon, even in winter, though they usually stuck to designated sites. This smoke came from deeper in the restricted area where permits weren't issued. Luke adjusted his path, curiosity and duty pulling him toward the source. Halfway down the slope, he spotted something that made him pause. Human footprints in the snow, one set large, another impossibly small. The stride pattern spoke of exhaustion, of someone stumbling rather than hiking. Beside them, scattered drops of something dark stained the white ground. Luke's training kicked in, both ranger and military. He moved more cautiously now, scanning for signs of danger as he followed the irregular trail. The tracks showed someone carrying a heavy burden, veering off the old logging path into thicker forest, seeking cover. His hand instinctively touched the radio at his belt. Protocol said to call it in, but Luke hesitated. 5 years in these woods had honed instincts stronger than regulations. Something about these tracks spoke of desperation, not danger, at least not from whoever made them. The footprints led to a small clearing where remnants of a hastily made fire smoldered. Luke noted the amateur setup, too close to low branches, inadequately contained. Whoever built it knew little about wilderness survival. Beside the dying embers lay a child's pink mitten, nearly buried in fresh fallen snow. Luke picked it up, turning the small garment in his weathered hands. It had been hand-knitted with care, though now it was damp and cold. He tucked it into his pocket and studied the area more carefully. The signs told a story. Someone had spent the night here with a child, moved on at first light, heading deeper into the forest. In February, with temperatures dropping below freezing at night, that was a recipe for tragedy. Luke spotted a torn piece of blanket caught on a bramble, then candy wrapper half buried in snow. Not the typical litter of careless hikers, but evidence of people unprepared, perhaps unwilling to be found. He considered his options. Following unknown people into the forest wasn't typically wise, but the small mitten in his pocket weighed on his conscience. A child in these conditions wouldn't survive another night. The wind shifted, carrying a sound that made his decision for him. Faint but unmistakable. A child's voice, thin with cold and fear, calling for her mother. Luke moved toward it without hesitation, his solitude forgotten. Whatever peace he'd sought in these woods would wait. Some things mattered more. Luke moved silently through the trees, following the sound of hushed voices. 20 yards ahead, a massive spruce had fallen, its roots torn from the ground, creating a natural shelter beneath its tangled base. That's where he found them. A woman sat with her back against the trunk, dark hair falling across a face too pale and drawn. In her arms, she clutched a small girl, wrapped in what looked like every piece of clothing they owned. A torn children's blanket with faded unicorns was tucked around the child's shoulders. The woman spotted him first. Her body tensed, arms tightening around the girl. Her eyes, green and fever-bright with fear, darted past him, searching for others. "Forest Service," Luke said, keeping his voice low and calm. He stayed where he was, making no sudden movements. "I'm Ranger Dawson. Are you folks all right?" The woman didn't answer, but the little girl turned to look at him. 6, maybe 7 years old, with her mother's dark hair and a face pinched by cold and hunger. "Are you a forest policeman?" the child asked, her voice small but curious. Luke softened his expression. "Something like that. I help people and animals in the forest. Like a doctor." The girl coughed, a wet sound that worried him. "Sometimes." Luke knelt, reducing his imposing height. "I found this." He pulled the pink mitten from his pocket, holding it out. "Thought someone might be missing it." The child's face brightened. "That's Emma's mitten," she said, referring to herself in third person. "Emma," Luke repeated, offering a gentle smile. "That's a pretty name." The woman finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "We're fine. Just resting. We'll be moving on soon." Luke noted her swollen knuckles, the careful way she held her left wrist. Nothing about this situation was fine. "It's 15 miles to the nearest town through rough country. Temperature's dropping again tonight." Emma coughed again, and the woman's facade cracked slightly, worry bleeding through. "I have a cabin," Luke said carefully. "Heat, food, first aid kit. No questions asked. We don't need charity," the woman said. But her body betrayed her, trembling from cold and what Luke suspected was exhaustion. "Mama, I'm cold," Emma whispered. Something in the woman's expression broke. She closed her eyes briefly, resignation and desperation warring on her face. "I'm Luke," he offered, still not moving closer. "Just trying to help." "Mara," she finally said, the single word seeming to cost her. "My daughter Emma." Luke nodded, acknowledging the trust it took to give even that much. "My cabin's about 2 miles from here. Can you both walk, or should I come back with a vehicle?" "We can walk," Mara said quickly, too quickly. Luke understood. She wanted to maintain the ability to flee if necessary. "All right then." He stood slowly. "May I help you up?" Mara hesitated, then gave a short nod. Luke approached carefully, offering his hand. She took it with obvious reluctance, her fingers ice-cold against his warm palm. Up close, he could see the shadows beneath her eyes, the chapped lips, the way she favored her right side. Emma seemed less wary, looking up at him with solemn brown eyes. "Are there bears at your house?" Luke smiled despite himself. "No bears. They're sleeping for winter. But I do have hot chocolate." "Emma likes hot chocolate," the girl said, a hint of life entering her voice. Mara stood unsteadily, still clutching Emma. Luke didn't miss how she winced at the movement. "I can carry her," he offered, nodding toward Emma. "No." The word was sharp. "Immediate." "Mama, I can walk," Emma protested. Though she looked barely able to stand, Luke stepped back, respecting the boundary. "Let's take it slow then. We'll rest when you need to." He watched Mara gather their meager belongings, a small backpack, the torn blanket. The camp had been desperate, makeshift. Whatever had driven them here had allowed little time for preparation. As they started walking, Luke noticed how Mara positioned herself between him and Emma, how her eyes constantly scanned the trees. Not just exhaustion in those movements, fear. The kind that came from experience, not imagination. "There's deer tracks here," Luke said, pointing to distract Emma from the difficult hike. "See how they make a heart shape?" Emma nodded, momentarily enchanted. Mara remained vigilant, saying nothing. But Luke caught her watching him with her daughter, measuring, assessing. Whatever story had brought them to his forest, Luke knew one thing for certain. It wasn't over yet. The journey to Luke's cabin took twice as long as it should have. Halfway there, Emma's small legs gave out entirely. Without asking permission, Luke had simply knelt down and said, "Hop on, kiddo." To his surprise, Mara had allowed it after only a moment's hesitation. Now Emma rode on his back, her arms loosely around his neck, her breath warm against his collar. She'd fallen into an exhausted sleep within minutes. Mara trudged beside them, determination in every step, despite her obvious fatigue. "Almost there," Luke said quietly, nodding toward a ridge ahead. "Just beyond those pines." Mara didn't respond, saving her energy for walking. Luke respected her silence, understanding it wasn't rudeness, but survival. His cabin came into view, a sturdy structure of weathered logs with a covered porch and smoke curling from the chimney. He'd left the wood stove burning low that morning, a habit from cold winters alone. "It's not much," Luke said. "But it's warm." Mara scanned the clearing. The single dirt road leading away, the truck parked to the side. Luke saw her cataloging escape routes, distances, options. "No neighbors for 5 miles, he added, reading her thoughts. "Ranger station's 10 miles south. I'm the only one posted here this season." He led them onto the porch and pushed open the heavy wooden door. Warmth greeted them, along with the simple, clean scent of pine and wood smoke. The cabin was modest but orderly. A main room with a kitchen area, wood stove, desk with radio equipment, and comfortable but utilitarian furniture. 2 doors led off to what were presumably bedrooms. Luke felt Emma stir as he ducked inside. "We're here, Emma," he said softly. The little girl lifted her head drowsily as he carefully lowered her to stand on the plank floor. Her eyes widened, taking in the cabin. "It's like the 3 Bears house," she whispered. Luke smiled despite himself. "Does that make me the bear?" For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched Mara's lips, quickly suppressed. She remained near the door, one hand on the knob. Luke moved to the kitchen, giving them space. He opened a cabinet, revealing a white metal box with a red cross. "First aid kit," he said, "for your wrist. And I should check Emma's cough." Mara tensed. "I can handle it," Luke nodded, setting the kit on the table without argument. "Bathroom's through there if you want to clean up. Spare towels in the cupboard." He gestured to the first door. "Guest room's next to it. I'll get some food started." He turned to the stove, deliberately focusing on filling a kettle rather than watching them. From the corner of his eye, he saw Mara finally step away from the door, whispering something to Emma. The little girl approached the wood stove cautiously. "It's warm," she said with something like wonder. "Emma," Mara called softly, nodding toward the bathroom. While they were gone, Luke made a quick radio call to the ranger station. "Base, this is Dawson." "Go ahead, Luke," came the crackling response. "Found some stranded hikers at the North Ridge. Mother and daughter. Bringing them in wasn't an option today. They'll stay at my cabin tonight. We'll update tomorrow. Need backup?" "Negative. Situation under control." "Copy that." "Storm front coming in tomorrow night. Keep an eye on it." "Will do." Dawson out. Luke had soup warming and sandwiches ready when Mara and Emma emerged. Emma's face was clean now, dark hair damp and combed. Mara had washed too, though the pallor of exhaustion remained. She'd bandaged her own wrist with supplies from his kit. "Sit," Luke said, nodding toward the table. "You both need to eat." Emma climbed onto a chair, eyes fixed on the steaming soup. Mara hesitated, then joined her daughter. Luke served them without fanfare, then stepped back, leaning against the counter to give them space. Emma ate hungrily. Mara took small, careful bites, as if testing each mouthful. Luke recognized the behavior of someone accustomed to having comfort yanked away without warning. "Thank you," Mara said finally, the words barely audible. Luke nodded. "There's more when you're ready." Emma looked around the cabin with growing curiosity. "Do you live here all alone?" "I do. Don't you get scared?" Luke smiled. "The forest doesn't scare me. What does?" Emma asked with a child's directness. Luke considered the question seriously. "Running out of coffee." Emma giggled, a bright sound that seemed to surprise even her mother. Outside, the afternoon light began to fade. Snow started falling again, soft flakes against the windows. Inside, for the first time in years, Luke's cabin held something besides solitude. Morning light filtered through frost-covered windows as Luke moved quietly around the kitchen. He'd given Mara and Emma the guest room, taking the couch for himself. Twice during the night, he'd heard the little girl coughing and had left a glass of water outside their door. The second time, it was gone when he checked later. Luke measured coffee grounds into the percolator, a rhythm so familiar he could do it half asleep. The cabin was peaceful in these early hours, a peace he'd once cherished for its solitude, now oddly enriched by the presence of others under his roof. He heard soft footsteps and turned to see Emma padding into the main room, her small face still puffy with sleep. She wore the same clothes as yesterday, rumpled now from being slept in. "Morning," Luke said quietly. "Your mom still sleeping?" Emma nodded, rubbing her eyes. "She's tired. She didn't sleep good before." Luke understood the unspoken before they found safety. "Hungry?" Another nod, more enthusiastic. "How about pancakes? Can you help me mix them?" Emma's eyes widened. "I know how. Mama lets me stir." Luke pulled a chair to the counter for her to stand on, setting out flour, eggs, and milk. As Emma carefully stirred the batter, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Luke heard another sound, the creak of the guest room door. Mara appeared, looking marginally better than yesterday, but still wary. Her eyes immediately found Emma, relief visible when she saw her daughter contentedly helping Luke. "There's coffee," Luke offered. Gesturing to a mug he'd already poured, Mara accepted it with a murmured thanks. Luke noticed her wrist was less swollen today. "Mama, I'm making pancakes," Emma announced proudly. A genuine smile softened Mara's face as she looked at her daughter. "I see that, sweetie." Luke turned on the small television mounted in the corner of the kitchen, a habit formed during lonely breakfasts. "Just the local news," he explained to Mara. "Signal's spotty out here. But I like to check the weather. The volume was low." The morning anchor's voice, a background murmur as Luke heated a cast-iron skillet. Emma carefully dropped spoonfuls of batter onto the hot surface. Beaming when Luke praised her technique, continuing coverage of the search for a missing mother and child, the anchor's voice suddenly cut through the domestic scene. Local businessman Robert Wells made an emotional plea yesterday for help finding his wife and 6-year-old daughter, who he claims were taken from their home 3 days ago. The plastic mixing bowl slipped from Mara's hands, clattering to the floor. Luke turned sharply toward the television, where the image had changed to show a man in his early 40s, handsome, well-dressed, his expression a perfect mask of concern and grief. "I just want my family back," the man was saying, his voice breaking with what seemed like genuine emotion. "If anyone has seen Mara or Emma, please contact authorities immediately. Mara has been struggling with some issues lately. I'm worried about Emma's safety. Please, if you're watching this, Mara, just bring our daughter home." Luke glanced at Mara. All color had drained from her face, her body rigid as if struck. Emma had frozen too, her small shoulders hunched suddenly, eyes fixed on the pancakes rather than the screen. Without comment, Luke switched off the television. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sizzle of batter on hot iron. "He's lying," Mara whispered finally, her voice flat. "He's the reason we left," Luke nodded once, accepting her words without question. "Pancakes are ready," he said to Emma, keeping his voice normal. "Let's eat before they get cold." He served the food, acting as if nothing had changed, though everything had. Emma picked at her pancakes, earlier enthusiasm gone. Mara didn't touch hers at all, her eyes distant, calculating. "We need to leave," she said suddenly. "Now, today," Luke set down his fork. "There's a storm coming in tonight. Heavy snow. You wouldn't make it to town." "You don't understand." Mara's voice held an edge of panic. "He'll find us. He always does." "Nobody knows you're here," Luke said evenly. "I reported finding stranded hikers. No names, no details. It won't matter. He has connections, people who owe him favors." She glanced at Emma, clearly measuring her words in front of her daughter. Luke considered this, then stood and walked to the window, surveying the expanse of forest and mountain beyond. "Two choices," he said finally. "You can try to outrun him, or you can let me help you face him." Mara stared at him, disbelief warring with desperate hope. "Why would you get involved?" "You don't know us." Luke turned back to them, his expression resolute. "I know enough. Emma, how would you like to draw for a while?" Luke asked, his tone deliberately light. I've got some paper and colored pencils in my desk. The little girl looked to her mother for permission. Mara nodded, brushing Emma's hair back with trembling fingers. Go ahead, sweetie. Stay where I can see you. Once Emma was settled at the small desk in the corner, absorbed in her drawing, Luke sat across from Mara at the kitchen table. He kept his movements slow, non-threatening, giving her space to gather her thoughts. Whatever you tell me stays between us, he said quietly. But I need to know what we're dealing with if I'm going to help. Mara's hands clutched her coffee mug, knuckles white. You don't want to get involved in this. Robert isn't. He's not who he appears to be. I figured that much. Luke's voice remained steady. The man on TV doesn't match the reason a woman and her daughter would risk freezing to death in the forest. Mara glanced toward Emma, ensuring she was out of earshot, then slowly pushed up the sleeve of her sweater. Fading bruises circled her upper arm, finger marks in distinct patterns that Luke recognized immediately. The kind that came from being grabbed with force, with intent. There's more, she said flatly. This was just the last time. Luke's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. The military had taught him to control his reactions, a skill he'd never been more grateful for than now. How long? He asked. 3 years. Not at first. Mara pulled her sleeve down, hiding the evidence. He was charming, successful. Everyone respected Robert Wells, the self-made businessman. By the time I saw who he really was, we were married. I was pregnant with Emma. Luke nodded, understanding the trap that had closed around her. I tried to leave once before, when Emma was 2. Mara's voice dropped further. He found us at my sister's house in Colorado, convinced everyone I was having a breakdown, that I was a danger to myself and Emma. He's very persuasive. And this time, he broke my wrist. She held up her bandaged arm. Because I bought Emma a dress without asking him first. Emma saw it happen. Her voice cracked slightly. I couldn't let her grow up thinking that was normal. That night, while he was at a business dinner, we just walked away. Took what we could carry, no car. He monitors the GPS, keeps track of the bank accounts, credit cards, phone records. I had some cash saved, tips from my job at the cafe. Not enough for a hotel, but enough for bus tickets. She exhaled slowly. We were headed to a women's shelter in Grant County. Got off at the wrong stop. Started walking. Got lost. Luke processed this, his ranger's mind mapping their likely path through the forest. That's nearly 20 miles from the highway. You walked all that way with Emma? We had no choice. Mara's eyes met his directly for the first time. He's on the city council. Friends with the sheriff. His family founded this county. When Robert Wells says his wife is unstable and has kidnapped their daughter, people listen. Luke understood now, the full weight of what they were facing. Not just an abusive husband, but a man with power, connections, and a public image to protect. He'll never stop looking, Mara continued. And when he finds us... She couldn't finish the sentence. He'd have to find you first, Luke said. And then he'd have to get through me. Mara shook her head. You don't know him, what he's capable of. And he doesn't know me. Luke's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. I've got a friend in the state police. Not local. Someone I trust. Would you be willing to talk to him? Fear flashed across Mara's face. The police won't help. They never have. Michael's different. We served together. He specializes in domestic cases now. From the corner, Emma's voice interrupted them. Mama, look what I made. She approached cautiously, holding a drawing. Mara took it, her expression softening as she studied her daughter's artwork. It's very beautiful, sweetheart. Emma pointed to the colorful figures. That's you, that's me, and that's Mr. Luke. We're in his forest. Luke glanced at the picture over Mara's shoulder. Emma had drawn 3 stick figures, holding hands beside a brown cabin. Above them, a yellow sun smiled down. No clouds, no storms, no threatening figures lurking in the background. The simple hope in the child's drawing settled something in Luke's mind. He'd made his decision the moment he'd found them beneath that fallen spruce, though he hadn't known it then. We've got options, he told Mara quietly, and time to figure them out. The storm will keep anyone from searching up here for at least 2 days. Mara looked from her daughter's drawing to Luke's steady gaze. For the first time, a fragile hope appeared in her eyes. Okay, she whispered. We'll try it your way. 3 days had passed since the storm blanketed the mountains with another foot of snow, effectively sealing them in at the cabin. What might have felt like imprisonment to some had become an unexpected sanctuary for Mara and Emma. Luke watched their gradual transformation with quiet satisfaction. Emma laughing more readily, Mara's shoulders lowering from their perpetual defensive hunch. This morning, Luke stood by the window with Emma, pointing out animal tracks in the fresh snow. See those there? That's a fox. And those bigger ones are from a deer. Emma pressed her nose to the cold glass, eyes wide with wonder. Can we go see them? When it warms up a bit, Luke promised. We'll follow their trails and see where they lead. Mara sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea. The bruises on her wrist had faded to yellowish smudges, and she'd regained some color in her face. Luke had noticed her watching him with Emma, her wariness gradually giving way to something like trust. Luke said there's no school in the forest, Emma announced, turning to her mother. But he's teaching me about animals and trees instead, Mara smiled. Is that so? He knows everything, Emma declared with childish certainty. He showed me how pine trees talk to each other under the ground. Mycorrhizal networks, Luke explained with a self-conscious shrug. Fungal connections between tree roots. They share nutrients and information. Like tree telephones, Emma added seriously. I'm going to check the radio, Luke said, moving to his desk where the communications equipment sat. See if I can reach Michael. He'd been trying to contact his friend in the state police for 2 days, but the storm had disrupted signals across the region. While he adjusted dials, Emma returned to the desk where she'd been drawing. Papers covered with colorful scrawls spread across the surface. Luke established a crackling connection with the ranger station first. Base, this is Dawson, over. Luke, good to hear your voice, came the response. You folks ride out the storm okay? All fine here. Roads still closed. Plows working on the main highway. Your access road's still buried. Probably another day at least. Copy that. Any messages for me? Nothing urgent. You need anything? Luke glanced at Mara and Emma. We're good for now. Dawson out. He turned his attention to another frequency, attempting to reach Michael. After several attempts with no response, he sighed and switched off the radio. Still nothing? Mara asked quietly. Luke shook his head. Cell service would be easier, but no phones, Mara finished. I know. It's safer that way. The first day, she'd explained how Robert tracked her previous attempts to leave through phone records and credit card usage. Emma approached, clutching several drawings. I made more pictures, Mr. Luke. Want to see? I sure do, he said, taking the offered papers. The first few were typical child artwork, the cabin surrounded by trees, stick figures representing the 3 of them, various forest animals. But as Luke flipped through the stack, his smile faded. In one drawing, a large black figure towered over a small blue one. Red jagged lines surrounded them both. What's this one about, Emma? He asked carefully. Emma glanced at her mother before answering. That's when Daddy got mad at Mama. Luke continued through the pictures. Another showed the same black figure, this time with what appeared to be a small stick in his hand, pointed at the blue figure cowering in a corner. A tiny purple figure hid behind what looked like a door. And this one, Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. When Daddy had his gun, he told Mama he'd use it if we ever left. Mara made a small, pained sound. Emma, baby, why don't you draw something happy now? Like the deer we saw yesterday. But Emma wasn't finished. She pulled another drawing from the bottom of the pollade, this one showing the black figure, talking to smaller grey figures wearing what Luke recognized as crude representations of police uniforms. Daddy's friends, Emma explained simply. They come to our house for dinner. They laugh really loud. Luke met Mara's eyes over the child's head. Her fear was palpable, but there was something else now, a fierce determination. The drawings had revealed what she hadn't been able to say aloud, the full extent of the danger they faced. I'm going to try Michael again, Luke said, his voice controlled, despite the anger building inside him. And keep trying until I reach him. He returned to the radio, adjusting frequencies with more urgency now. Behind him, he heard Mara gather Emma close, murmuring reassurances. Finally, a familiar voice crackled through the static. "Anderson here." Relief flooded through Luke. "Michael, it's Luke Dawson. I need your help, discreetly." He explained the situation in careful terms, aware of Emma's presence. Michael asked pointed, professional questions, taking the information without judgment. "This guy sounds connected locally, but I can make some inquiries at the state level," Michael said finally. "Can you keep them safe for a few more days?" Luke looked over at Mara and Emma, now sitting together by the wood stove. "As long as it takes." The roads cleared faster than expected. 5 days after finding Mara and Emma, Luke stood in his kitchen, preparing for his first trip into town. "I need to get supplies," he explained, making a list at the table. "And check in at the ranger station in person." Mara nodded, tension visible in her shoulders again. The relative safety of the past few days had allowed her to lower her guard slightly, but the thought of Luke leaving, of being alone, clearly unsettled her. "We have a problem," Luke continued gently. "Michael says Robert has filed a missing persons report. There are search parties organizing." Luke was already gathering essentials, his movements efficient. "Wake Emma, dress her warmly. We have maybe 30 minutes. As Mara hurried to the sleeping alcove, Luke retrieved his rifle and checked his phone. No signal. They were too deep in the mountains. No way to alert Michael to the change in plans. "What's happening?" Emma asked sleepily as Mara helped her dress in layers. "We're going on our adventure a little earlier than planned," Mara explained, her voice admirably steady. "Like a surprise." Luke outlined the plan quickly. "There's a fire service cabin 5 miles northeast. We can reach it by noon if we move fast. It has a radio to call for help. Why can't we use the snowmobile?" Mara asked, pulling on her gloves. "Too noisy. They'd hear us coming down the trail." Luke checked the window again. "We'll go on foot through the deep woods." "It's harder terrain, but better cover." They were ready in minutes, Luke carrying the emergency pack, Mara with a smaller bag of essentials, Emma bundled against the cold. Luke led them out the back of the cabin, away from the main trail, into the dense pine forest, where the snow was shallower beneath the thick canopy. "Step where I step," he instructed. "We need to minimize tracks." They'd covered less than a mile when the distant sound of voices carried through the crisp air. Robert and his men had reached the cabin. Luke signaled for absolute silence, lifting Emma into his arms to move faster through a particularly dense thicket. "They've been here recently," a man's voice called. "Coffee pots still warm. Find them." Another voice, sharper, commanding. Robert's voice. "They can't have gone far. The woman's not built for this terrain." Luke felt Mara stiffen beside him. He squeezed her arm reassuringly, then motioned them onward. They moved as quickly as silence allowed, Luke leading them through game trails and natural breaks in the forest. His ranger knowledge of the terrain proved invaluable, avoiding open areas, using ridgelines to break sight lines, doubling back across rocky outcrops to confuse their trail. An hour into their flight, Emma began to tire. Luke carried her on his shoulders, the little girl's arms wrapped trustingly around his neck. Mara pressed forward without complaint, though Luke could see exhaustion in the set of her shoulders. The sun climbed higher, bringing little warmth to the winter forest. Luke called a brief halt in a sheltered hollow, allowing them to drink water and catch their breath. "Are we safe yet?" Emma whispered. Before Luke could answer, the crack of a branch breaking nearby froze them all in place. Luke lowered Emma silently to the ground, motioning Mara to stay with her as he edged toward the sound. Rifle ready. Through the trees he spotted one of Robert's men, a stocky, hard-faced individual in expensive winter gear, moving with the practiced ease of someone comfortable in the wilderness. A hunter. The man paused, scanning the forest floor, then spoke into a handheld radio. "Nothing on the west slope. Heading north toward the ravine." Luke slipped back to Mara and Emma. "One of them is nearby. We need to move. Different direction." They altered course, heading east toward steeper terrain. The change meant a longer journey to the fire cabin, but safety outweighed speed now. Luke led them carefully, pausing frequently to listen for pursuers. By mid-morning, they'd reached a steep ravine bisecting their path. At the bottom, a half-frozen stream gurgled beneath a crust of ice. The descent looked treacherous, slick rocks and loose soil under snow. We cross here, Luke decided. The water will hide our scent and tracks. He was helping Mara navigate a particularly steep section when Emma slipped. Her startled cry echoed briefly before Mara caught her, but the damage was done. The sound carried in the winter air. Did you hear that? A distant voice. This way. Another, closer. Run, Luke ordered. Down to the stream. I'll hold them off. No. Mara clutched his arm. We stay together. Mara, please. I can buy you time. Luke pressed the prepaid phone into her hand. The fire cabin is 2 miles east along the stream. Call Michael when you get there. Before she could protest further, movement on the ridge above caught their attention. Robert Wells stood silhouetted against the sky, staring down at them with cold triumph. "Found you," he called, his voice eerily calm. "You've led me on quite a chase, Mara." Luke pushed Mara and Emma behind him, rifle raised. "That's far enough, Wells." Robert studied Luke with clinical detachment. "The Ranger, I presume?" "How touching. Did my wife seduce you into this little rescue fantasy, or are you just naturally heroic?" "Walk away," Luke warned. "State police are already investigating you. Financial crimes. Serious charges." Something flickered in Robert's expression, surprise quickly masked. "Is that what she told you? That I'm some kind of criminal?" He laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the ravine. "Mara has always been creative with the truth. Especially when she's not taking her medication." Mara stepped out from behind Luke, facing her husband directly. "Stop it, Robert. There is no medication. There never was, sweetheart." Robert's voice dripped with concern, so practiced it almost sounded genuine. "You know that's not true. The doctors were very clear about what happens when you stop taking it." Luke kept his rifle trained on Robert, watching as the other 2 men spread out along the ridge above them. Both carried handguns, though they hadn't drawn them yet. "He's lying," Mara said to Luke, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "This is what he does. Twists everything," Robert sighed theatrically. "You see what I've been dealing with? This paranoia, these delusions." His gaze shifted to Emma, who clung to Mara's leg. "Emma, honey, Daddy's here to take you home. Don't you want to come home?" Emma pressed her face against her mother's side, refusing to look up at him. "Even our daughter is afraid of me now." Robert's expression hardened. "What have you been telling her, Mara?" "The truth," Mara said simply. "That you hurt people. That you hurt me." One of Robert's men shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his employer with newfound uncertainty. Luke noticed the hesitation, filing it away. "A potential crack in Robert's facade, Mr. Wells," Luke said, keeping his voice conversational. 3 state troopers are meeting us at a ranger station 8 miles from here. When we don't arrive, they'll come looking. Whatever you're planning, it won't end well for you." Robert's smile never reached his eyes. "A valiant bluff, Ranger. But we both know the state boys aren't anywhere near here. Too busy with their so-called financial investigation. Sloppy work, by the way. They'll find nothing that can't be explained away." As Robert spoke, his men had continued to spread out, trying to flank their position. Luke tracked their movements with his peripheral vision, calculating angles, options. "Dan," Robert called to the man on his left, "why don't you go help my wife up the slope? She seems to have gotten herself lost." The man, Dan, moved cautiously down the ravine's side. Luke swung his rifle to cover him. "Stay where you are. There's no need for this to get messy," Robert said. "I just want my family back." "Whatever Mara's told you, I've seen the bruises," Luke interrupted. "And Emma's drawings. Pretty clear picture." Something ugly flashed across Robert's face, the mask of concern briefly slipping. Children have vivid imaginations, and Mara's always bruised easily. Clumsy. "Mr. Luke," Emma said suddenly, her small voice surprisingly clear. "He's the bad man from my pictures, the one who made Mama cry." Robert's expression darkened further. "That's enough, Emma, you're confused." "I'm not confused," Emma replied, with the simple certainty of a child. "You're the one who lies." Robert's careful composure cracked visibly. "This is ridiculous. I'm taking my family home now." He gestured sharply to his men. "Get them up here." Both men began moving down the ravine from different directions. Luke couldn't cover them both. "Mara," Luke said quietly, "when I say run, take Emma along the stream bed. "Don't stop. I'm not leaving you," she whispered fiercely. "You have to." For Emma, the nearest man, Dan, was only 20 feet away now, and moving inside his jacket toward what Luke assumed was a concealed weapon. "That's close enough," Luke warned. "Look," Dan said, seeming almost apologetic. "We're just here to help Mr. Wells get his family back. Nobody needs to get hurt. He told you she kidnapped their daughter," Luke asked, keeping his rifle trained on the man's chest. "That she's unstable, dangerous maybe?" Dan's hesitation was answer enough. "Ask yourself why he hired private investigators instead of going through proper channels," Luke continued. "Why he'd track them into remote wilderness instead of letting authorities handle it." "Don't listen to him, Dan," Robert snapped. "Do your job." But doubt had taken root. Dan glanced between Robert and Mara, noticing Emma's obvious fear, the protective way Mara held her daughter. "Mr. Wells," Dan said slowly, "you said this would be a simple retrieval. Family reconciliation." "It is," Robert hissed. "My wife is sick. She needs help." "I'm not sick," Mara called clearly. "I'm afraid there's a difference." The second man had continued his approach during this exchange, less troubled by moral quandaries than his partner. His hand emerged from his jacket with a pistol. "Enough talking," he growled. "Let's get this done." Everything happened in a blur. Luke fired a warning shot into the ground near the armed man, sending him diving for cover. "Run!" he shouted to Mara. She grabbed Emma and splashed into the shallow stream, moving as fast as the slippery rocks allowed. Robert's shout of rage echoed through the ravine. He scrambled down the slope with reckless speed, intent on pursuit. The armed man recovered, aiming his pistol at Luke, but Dan, in a moment of clarity or conscience, moved suddenly between them. "Wait, this isn't right, Jim. Look at them, they're terrified." "This isn't what we signed on for." The distraction gave Luke the moment he needed. He tackled Jim, sending the pistol flying into the snow as both men crashed to the ground. They grappled briefly before Luke's military training gave him the advantage. A swift blow rendered Jim unconscious. Luke turned to find Robert had ignored the struggle. Focused solely on pursuing Mara and Emma, Luke charged after him, closing the distance as Robert reached the stream where Mara had stumbled. Emma clutched tightly in her arms. "You're not taking them anywhere?" Luke growled, catching Robert's arm. Robert whirled, his handsome face contorted with rage. All pretense of concern vanished. "She's my wife, my daughter, my property." The words seemed to hang in the frigid air between them. Property. The mask had finally fallen completely. "No," Luke said simply. "They're not." Robert's response was a wild swing that Luke easily deflected. The fight that followed was brutal but brief. Robert's rage making him careless against Luke's disciplined combat training. Luke could have ended it quickly, but held back from causing serious injury, aware that Dan was watching, a potential witness to whatever happened next. When Robert lay subdued in the snow, Luke turned to check on Mara and Emma. The momentary distraction was all Robert needed. He lurched up, retrieving Jim's fallen pistol from the snow. "Luke!" Mara screamed in warning. Luke spun as Robert raised the weapon. But before he could fire, the ground beneath Robert's feet, weakened by their struggle on the ravine's edge, gave way. With a startled cry, Robert tumbled backward down a steep section of the ravine, disappearing from view. The fire service cabin hummed with activity. What had been designed as a simple way station for forest rangers had transformed into an impromptu command center. Outside, the thrum of a medical helicopter grew louder as it approached a makeshift landing zone, cleared by the troopers. Inside, Luke sat beside Mara on a worn bench, a blanket around her shoulders. Emma had finally succumbed to exhaustion, sleeping on a cot in the corner, her small face peaceful for the first time in hours. Across the room, Michael conferred with his colleagues while medics attended to Robert, whose sullen anger had given way to pained silence. "Here," Michael said, handing Luke a steaming mug of coffee before sitting across from them. "You look like you need this." Luke accepted gratefully, passing it to Mara, who wrapped her cold fingers around the warmth. "What happens now?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Medical evac for Wells first," Michael explained. "Then we'll get statements from everyone." He glanced toward Dan and Jim, who sat apart from each other, both looking shell-shocked. "Your husband's associates are already cooperating. Seems they didn't sign up for what they witnessed today." "They're not the only witnesses," Luke said, nodding toward his pack. "I've got trail camera photos, time-stamped. Shows Wells and his men approaching the cabin armed." Michael's eyebrows rose. "That'll help with the charges." "There's more," Luke continued. "When I was treating him, I found his phone. He produced a high-end smartphone in a waterproof case. It's locked, but nothing," Michael interrupted, taking the phone carefully by the edges. "This is evidence. We'll get a warrant to search it. He threatened me with that phone," Mara said suddenly. "Recorded me without consent during arguments, edited the recordings to make me sound hysterical, then played them for his friends. Said he'd use them if I ever tried to leave." Michael's expression hardened. "That's illegal surveillance." Another charge to add. The medics signaled they were ready to move Robert. As they lifted the stretcher, Robert's eyes locked with Mara's across the room, a gaze so filled with cold hatred that she involuntarily pressed closer to Luke. "This isn't over," Robert said, his cultured voice incongruously calm despite his circumstances. "You'll never prove anything." "It's her word against mine." "Not anymore," Michael replied, holding up the phone in its evidence bag. "Technology's a funny thing. Keeps records of all sorts of conversations." Something flickered in Robert's eyes, the first genuine fear Luke had seen from him. "That's my personal property," he protested. "You have no right. I've got probable cause and a judge who will agree," Michael cut him off. "Save your breath. You'll need it to explain a lot of things." As the medics carried Robert out to the waiting helicopter, Luke felt Mara trembling beside him. "He's never looked at me like that before," she whispered. "Like he'd kill me if he could." "He can't hurt you anymore," Luke assured her, though the cold calculation in Robert's eyes had disturbed him too. "He's going to jail. For how long?" Mara's question hung in the air. Michael rejoined them after the helicopter departed. "We've got enough to hold him, but building a case will take time." He hesitated. "Mara, I need to ask, are you willing to testify?" "About the abuse?" Mara's gaze drifted to Emma, still sleeping peacefully. "If that's what it takes to keep her safe, yes. It won't be easy," Michael warned. "His lawyers will try to discredit you." "I know," Mara said, straightening her shoulders. "But I'm done being afraid." A younger trooper approached, holding Robert's phone. "Sir, you need to see this." Tech unit got a preliminary crack at his passcode. The excitement in his voice was evident. "There's a folder of threatening texts he sent her. Hundreds of them, and financial records, offshore accounts, wire transfers to shell companies." Michael took the phone, scrolling through the contents, his expression growing grimmer by the second. "This is extensive. He documented everything. His threats, her responses, even pictures of injuries." He looked up at Mara. "I'm sorry you had to go through this, but this evidence is going to put him away for a very long time." "He kept records because he thought he was untouchable," Luke observed. "That arrogance is finally going to cost him." The cabin door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and a petite woman in a state police uniform. "Transportation's here," she announced. "We can move everyone to the ranger station now." "Road's been cleared," Michael nodded. "This is Sergeant Rivera, my partner. She'll escort you to safe accommodation while we process everything." "Will we have to go back to town?" Mara asked, fear edging her voice. "Where people know him?" "No," Michael assured her. "There's a state-operated safe house in Mapleton. Completely confidential location. You and Emma will stay there until the preliminary hearing." "And after?" Luke asked the question Mara couldn't voice. Michael and Rivera exchanged a glance. "That depends on how the case develops," Rivera said gently. "But witness protection is a possibility if needed." The word hung heavy in the air. Protection, new identities, a completely different life. Luke moved to wake Emma. The little girl blinked drowsily, then reached for him with complete trust. "Are we going home now, Mr. Luke?" The innocent question lodged in his chest like a physical pain. Home. Such a simple concept, so complicated in reality. "We're going somewhere safe," he told her, smoothing her tangled hair. "Somewhere warm." Outside, vehicles waited to transport them back to civilization, back to legal systems and court proceedings, statements and evidence, back to a world where the simple clarity of survival in the forest would be replaced by the complex machinery of justice. As they prepared to leave, Mara paused in the doorway, looking back at the small cabin that had provided their last sanctuary. "Thank you," she whispered, though whether to Luke or to the forest itself, he couldn't tell. 1 week had passed since the confrontation in the forest. Mara and Emma had settled into the safe house in Mapleton, a modest 2-bedroom home with security systems, private yard, and round-the-clock protection, courtesy of the state police. The snow-covered mountains were visible from the kitchen window, a constant reminder of the wilderness that had both endangered and saved them. Luke entered the kitchen to find Mara at the table, surrounded by papers. The court summons lay at the center, official and imposing, with its embossed seal. He set down a grocery bag and began unpacking supplies. "Michael called," he said. "The grand jury returned indictments this morning. Multiple felony counts." Mara looked up, a complicated mix of relief and anxiety crossing her face. "So it's really happening?" "It is." Luke arranged fresh fruit in a bowl, little normalcies he discovered Emma enjoyed. Robert's lawyers tried to get him released on bail, but the judge denied it. "Flight risk, and his connections in town. Not as strong as he thought." Luke's voice held grim satisfaction. "Amazing how quickly people distance themselves once the Financial Crimes Unit starts asking questions. Seems Robert was involving a lot of local businessmen in his schemes." Emma's voice floated from the living room where she was working with a child psychologist, part of the preparation for potentially testifying. "Though everyone hoped it wouldn't come to that." "How is she today?" Luke asked. "Better." Mara gathered the papers into a folder. "She's having fewer nightmares. Dr. Bennett says she's remarkably resilient." Pride warmed her voice. "She asks about the forest, though. And you, she misses our time there." Mara felt the familiar wave of gratitude that sometimes still caught her by surprise, for her daughter's resilience, for their safety, for the simple joy of an ordinary day without fear. "She's thriving," Luke observed quietly, standing beside Mara. "You both are." "We had help." Mara leaned slightly against his solid presence. The wildlife rehabilitation training she'd begun 3 months ago had given her purpose beyond survival, a way to nurture other wounded creatures back to independence. "Good help." They worked together through the afternoon, planting, watering, Luke showing Emma how to mulch around the seedlings to retain moisture. When the garden was finished, they gathered by the small mesh habitat where Emma's butterflies waited, their wings still soft and new after emerging from chrysalides. "Ready?" Luke asked, handing Emma the habitat. She nodded solemnly, understanding the responsibility of release. Carefully opening the mesh door, she watched as the first butterfly tested its wings, then fluttered tentatively into the spring air, followed by its companions. Emma's face shone with wonder as the delicate creatures spiraled upward, catching currents of warm air. "They'll find flowers now," Luke explained. "Start their own families. Will they remember us?" Emma asked. "Not the way we remember things," Luke said honestly. "But in their own way, yes. We helped them become what they were meant to be." Mara slipped her hand into Luke's as they watched the butterflies disperse into the forest. The simple gesture spoke volumes about how far they'd come, from fearful strangers to family, from crisis to calm, from surviving to living. Later, as evening approached, Luke stepped onto the porch where Mara sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. The same mountains that had once hidden them in their fear now stood as steadfast guardians of their peace. "I've been thinking," he said, settling beside her. "The Ranger Service offered me the permanent post here. No more rotating assignments. You're staying?" The question held no anxiety, only quiet pleasure. "If you and Emma want that too." Luke reached into his pocket, producing a small wooden box. Inside lay a simple ring, a band of polished silver with a delicate pine tree etched into its surface. "Luke," Mara whispered, emotion tightening her throat. "No rush," he assured her. "We can take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know that for me, it's not temporary." From inside the cabin came the sound of Emma humming as she recorded observations about her butterflies in a journal. Ordinary, peaceful sounds of a child at ease in her world. Mara took the ring, slipping it onto her finger where once a symbol of captivity had rested. This felt entirely different, not a shackle but a choice. Not an ending but a beginning. "Yes," she said simply. Then, with the ghost of laughter in her voice, "No rush, but yes." The new sign Luke had carved for the cabin's mailbox waited in his workshop, ready to be installed. "Ranger Dawson and family," it read, with space beneath for Emma's handprint to join theirs. Tomorrow they would place it together, another step in claiming this place, this life, as their own.